I wasn't always a Christian, so I can too easily relate to how weird Christians might seem to the non-Christian world. I get it. If you're not a Christian, you might think that all religions are basically the same with some small little nuances, and I get that perspective as well. If that's you, then I hope that this video at least gives you some insights as to why Christianity differs in drastic ways from every other religion, and why I believe that Christianity is right for you no matter who you are or what you've been through. And if you are a Christian, I'm going to give you 3 things that every single Christian absolutely should know, but unfortunately, most don't. And that's why the rest of the world is under the assumption that Christianity is really just like every other religion out there, which is why they don't see much of a need for Jesus in the first place. Now, all 3 of the reasons that I'm going to give are critical, so make sure you stick around to the end. And if this is your first time here, go ahead and hit that sub button and meme team. You guys ready? Then let's go! Now, if you were to ask most Christians why they know that Christianity is true, you're probably going to be getting a lot of the same things that you've heard from people in every other religion. And this is where my story kicks in. Prior to me being convinced that Christianity was true, I went to every single kind of church that I could find, ranging from every kind of Christian church to non-Christian churches, even to the Church of Scientology. And the main question I asked everyone was why their religion was true as opposed to other religions that contradict their religion's teachings. When I asked this, I got the same sorts of responses over and over again. I would have people tell me some sort of personal story about how something happened that they consider to be miraculous, and how they used to be a bad person, but now they're a lot better, and a bunch of other things along those lines. During this time, I was going to a different church every week, and I was hoping to hear something that stood out from all of the other reasons, but all I got was really the exact same reasoning from the church that I was at the week prior. Now, this actually kind of bugged me because at that point, I was convinced that God existed, but I wasn't really too convinced if he was revealed in any of the major religions today. So now, standing from where I'm at today, when I look back at those times, I realize why people think that Christianity is the same as every other religion. People think that there isn't any evidence for any of them, and it all comes down to people's own subjective and personal or private experiences. Now, of course, I'm not saying that it's wrong for you to talk about your experiences or what God has done in your life. Of course, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that later, I came to realize that there was at least one thing that Christians can say when asked the question of why their view is true as opposed to others, and it was something that other religions can't also claim. That thing is clear objective evidence. Let me explain. When it comes to whether or not Christianity is true, that's entirely based on the claim that Jesus rose from the dead. As Paul the Apostle even says in the Bible, if Jesus had not been raised from the dead, then our faith is worthless and we should be pitied more than anyone else. The truth of Christianity literally stands or falls on whether or not Christ really did raise from the dead, because Christianity teaches that those who trust in Christ will raise from death to life, just as Christ raised from death to life. So if Jesus didn't really raise from the dead, then neither will we. Christianity is ultimately about God's plan to save us from death and enter into a relationship with him, so the truth of Christianity really does depend on that single event. So, the question now is, do we have any reason to think that the resurrection actually happened? To cut the suspense, the answer is yes. We actually do have really good evidence in support of the resurrection of Jesus that's supported by historical facts that virtually all historians are in unanimous agreement about. I won't argue for the facts here, but I went ahead and linked a couple of videos down below that are great in explaining the basic overview of some of the facts if you're interested in learning more. But the important takeaway here is to realize that when it comes to the facts and evidence in support of a religion or a worldview, no other religion is even in the same ballpark as Christianity. Now, I know that that sounds like a bold claim, but the fact is that the evidence surrounding the facts of other religions are usually non-existent, or at best, any of the facts or evidence given for the core truth of their religion doesn't even come close in terms of quality or veracity compared to the core truth of Christianity. The second reason for why Christianity is different is because according to Christianity, good people aren't saved. Now, I know that that's immediately offensive, but just hear me out. The problem isn't that good people can't be saved, but it's that whatever we mean by good, that standard alone is enough to show you that you aren't one of those good people that you describe. Now, I know that you don't believe me. I wouldn't believe me either. So try and think of it this way. Imagine you die today and you find yourself in front of God. Now, this is the time where you await judgment to know if you'll make it into heaven or not. Of course, you go into panic mode and you start to try to remember the 10 Commandments just so that way you can kind of get a heads up to how good you did. And you only remember 4, but you know that you probably broke at least two of those. Once you start to realize that you might be in trouble, you start to think how it isn't fair that God would judge you by some commandments that you didn't even believe in while you were on earth. While you were on earth, you thought that you were a good person, and you assumed that even if God did exist, surely he would know that you're a good person and let you into heaven. So God being omniscient, he already knows what you're thinking. And he says, I understand that you didn't accept the Bible while you were on earth, so I won't judge you by the commandments given in the Bible. And at this point, you let out a big sigh of relief because a big weight has just been lifted from your shoulders. All along, you knew that you were a good person. But then he says, instead, I'll judge you by your own standards. And he pulls out a video recorder. And on that video recorder, you find that there's a recording of every single time that you told someone that they shouldn't do something that you considered to be immoral. It captured every single moment that you got morally outraged or complained about something that someone else did. Now, with the recorder in his hand, God tells you that he's going to be fair and he's only going to judge you by your own moral standards. You know, the moral standards that you consider to be fair. And he says that if he's going to condemn you, he's only going to condemn you according to the standards that you believed in and the standards that you condemned other people by. That's fair. And then he presses play. And you both sit there watching recordings of every single time that you made a moral claim, and he starts writing them all down on a list. And you know that you're going to be held accountable to the moral principle of the claims that you made. So maybe in different ways you said things like, you shouldn't tell others how to live their lives, or you shouldn't be selfish, or you shouldn't hurt other people's feelings, or anything like that. Right after the first one, you're hoping that it's done, but what you realize is that the list keeps getting longer and longer. When the footage finally stops, God hands you the list, and then he asks, how do you think you did? What do you think your answer would be? If you're anything like me, you probably didn't do too well. You might even feel blindsided about how bad you did, but the reality is, we all think we're far better than we actually are, even according to our own standards. And the same principle applies to religious people who do believe in God. We see this same principle being applied to the religious people at the time of Jesus. They thought that they were in a better position with God than the sinners because they kept the law. But then Jesus came along to show that they weren't any better off. Remember what Jesus said to him? He's like, oh, so you think you're good because you haven't committed murder and adultery? Well, I've got some bad news for you. If you've even looked at your brother with hate, you've committed murder in your heart. And if you've even looked at a woman with lust, then you've committed adultery in your heart. So you've broken the same laws that the sinners have. Oh, and by the way, don't just ignore your enemies and not retaliate with harm when they've done you wrong, but instead you have to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And we wonder why they wanted Jesus killed. In Christianity, the law wasn't made to show you how good you are, but instead it was made to show you how good that you aren't, because then and only then will you realize your need for a savior. So while in every other religion, your faithfulness or your morality or your hard work determines if you get into heaven or not, Christianity actually has it the other way around. In Christianity, you don't get into heaven by trying harder or being more moral than others, because the fact is, you can't be perfect and you can't even live up to your own standards. In fact, it doesn't even depend on your hard work or your moral performance at all. Instead, it depends on what Christ did on the cross in your place and the moral life that he lived that allows those of us who believe in him to enter into heaven. He met the standards that we couldn't, and then he offered his life to us as a free gift so that way God can see his life in our place instead of our own. And this leads to the last point. In Christianity, we aren't pointing to a prophet, but we're pointing to God. All religions are fundamentally based on a prophet or a guru telling you how you can find God. They claim to be a messenger sent by God to tell you how you have to do some sort of hard work into building your way up to God in order to reach heaven. But Christianity is the only religion in the world that teaches the opposite. Instead of you working your way up to God, God puts on human flesh and enters into our world in order to suffer and die in our place so that way we could have an eternal relationship with him. So to put it simply, every other religion shows you the hard work that you can do in order to find or reach God. But in Christianity, God is the one who does the hard work and comes down from heaven to earth in order to find and reach you. In other words, they're kind of telling you how to build a ladder from here to heaven in hopes that you can get the ladder built before you die, and then you can finally reach God. So God is the one who did the hard work of building the ladder from heaven down to us instead of the other way around. So while every other religion says, I'm a prophet, come to help you find God, Christianity says, I'm God, come to find you. While they say, obey and you might be accepted, only in Christianity does God say, you're accepted, now you get to obey out of love rather than fear. Now, there's another side to the claim that Christianity is just like every other religion, kind of like the claim that Katy Perry made in her recent interview with Apple Music, where she talks about it. Go ahead and click here to see what I mean. But the next time that you hear people claiming that Christianity is just like every other religion, what are you going to say? What do you mean?